So we think about a provider compensation team. So if you're going to be at a health system or a medical group, what does the provider compensation team do? We came up with this Essential Six model. I don't know who came this up, but this is just something that we've dubbed. And it's really about, if you think about the life cycle of a provider, it's provider contracting, so it's getting the provider into the organization. It's about data management and mapping, pay administration, making sure that you pay people timely and accurately. Business operations, so how do you work with your frontline leaders, your executives, your C-suite leaders? What is the strategy for the organization as well? So are you going to do a full employment model? Are you going to be looking at cardiologists or urologists or family practice medicines? What is your strategy in the marketplace? And then, of course, compliance and regulatory adherence. That's really about contract management and regulatory compliance. So you're doing both with legal and compliance there. We can keep this brief, but thinking about provider contracting, this is really kind of the life cycle is recruitment, which is you have to source your providers. You have to be able to recruit them, do some contract negotiations. You go back and forth, onboarding them, and then you do the renewals. And this can be a cumbersome process from a physician or provider contracting perspective. One is, how do you set the pay ranges? So if you've all looked for jobs before, in some states, you're required to post what are the pay ranges for pay fairness. Someone has to come up with those numbers. So someone has to look at that. If you're negotiating with providers, maybe they make a request. You need to set those boundaries, right? You can't pay everyone. That'd be great, right? If you could pay everyone everything they wanted. But you can't do that. It's business. We have limited resources and we have to allocate. We have to make sure that we pay people fairly and equitable. So this is a tough area. If you do this is really an HR function. Most of this is typically with HR, with the recruitment piece, and then you work a lot with the legal team. The legal team is actually drafting the contracts. Data mapping and reporting. If you're in the provider comp space, you're using a lot of different data, right? HRIS systems for employment data. You're using contract management systems. You have your financial enterprise systems, your EMRs for clinical quality. All that data is used for different purposes than provider and workforce strategy. You need to combine it together and manipulate it to be able to do that. A good example would be work RVUs. If you extract work RVUs out of your EMR, that might not be used for compensation purposes. You need to make some adjustments. You have unlisted codes. So for services that maybe Medicare doesn't recognize, but your system, you get paid for. Maybe you have services in kind. You have a provider that goes to a clinic that is 50 miles outside of town. You're going to provide them some additional work RVUs for the windshield time. So you need to manage that data, pull it in, and then get it in the format that's used for provider pay. Pay administration, this is what Katie and I do most of the time. You have to pay your providers on time and accurately. So you take these contracts, they're written in the most complicated language ever. Attorneys did it. And you have to put it into formulas. You have to get it into Excel sheets, basically. And then you need to capture time and attendance performance. So when were the work RVUs done? Were the charts closed? Did we get paid for these services? Did the provider do these services on this date? Did they get scheduled twice? Can they possibly do this data? This is something I've come across a number of times. Hey, how could a provider do 175 hours of work in a week, right? That doesn't quite make sense. So there's some areas that you need to have some internal controls on. So business partnerships, when you're inside a provider comp team, you're working with frontline leaders, you're working with operational departments, you're working with financial leaders. They all have different objectives and goals, but you're the center point of this. So if you're in compliance, you're probably wanting to know how many providers are paid above the 90th percentile. If you're in ops, you probably want to know, what is my capacity for these providers? Are they high producers, low producers, and I'm paying them a fair rate? Am I going to be financially sustainable? I own the budget. How do I make sure that this is within the budget? So you have to facilitate those type of conversations. So this is kind of an operational role within the provider comp department. Workforce strategy. So this is thinking about the future. This is not what you're doing day-to-day operations. It could be, how many providers do I need in the market? What does the demographics of my market look like, and what will I need in the future? So if if I service an area that's maybe a little bit younger, has high employment, maybe that's more like an OBGYN area. If I'm servicing maybe an older community, maybe it's more like ortho and cardiology. So you're thinking about these different areas and how can I service this in the market, maybe collaborate with different areas. You know, oncology is a very expensive service line. So maybe you think about partnerships and opportunities there. And then lastly, compliance. So this is really about fair market value. You're probably doing some valuation work, doing some assessments, making sure that the contracts are still accurate and that the services are being rendered in the way that the contract reflects. There's also some other regulatory pieces too, right? Making sure that you're paying people an equitable amount. You don't have any pay gaps or discrepancies in how you're paying folks.